When my daughter said, "You're not half the woman Dad's wife is," I didn't cry. I just smiled, because one day, she would learn what half the truth really costs. They say silence can be a shield, but for me, silence was a wound that never healed. I live in a small house at the edge of town, the kind people drive past without noticing. The paint peels at the corners, the garden smells faintly of rosemary and earth, and my hands, well, they carry more stories than wrinkles. Every morning I make tea and watch the road. Not because I expect anyone, but because habits like love don't die easy. Sometimes I still set out 3 cups. One for me, one for my daughter, one for my son. And sometimes, when the wind moves just right, I imagine their laughter filling this kitchen again. That morning the phone rang. My daughter's voice was bright, a little too bright. "Mom, we're coming by today. We need to talk." My heart leapt before I could stop it. Maybe they missed me. Maybe they just want to see me. I cleaned the house, made stew, even baked cornbread like I used to when they were small. Funny how we mothers prepare love in casseroles and prayers. When they arrived, I saw the difference immediately. Their car was shiny, their clothes expensive. They looked like they belonged to another world, a world that didn't smell of old wood and quiet evenings. My daughter hugged me quickly, her perfume sharp and unfamiliar. My son stood behind her, scrolling his phone, not meeting my eyes. "Mom," she began, sitting down like someone about to deliver bad news. "We just wanted to talk about you and Dad." I smiled softly. "There's not much to talk about, honey. That chapter's been closed a long time." She frowned. "That's the thing. Dad's happy now. Really happy. You should see how gentle his wife is. How kind." She paused, glanced at her brother, then added, She's everything you weren't." The words hit like a slow echo, each syllable sharper than the last. My son finally looked up. "You're not half the woman Dad's wife is." For a moment even the clock stopped ticking. I could hear only the soft clink of my spoon against the teacup as I stirred a tea I wasn't drinking. I smiled because mothers do that. We smile when our hearts are breaking, so our children don't see the pieces fall. "Well," I said quietly, "then your father chose well." They shifted uncomfortably, mistaking my calm for guilt. They had no idea that beneath that calm lay years of unspoken truths I'd buried for their peace. The visit didn't last long. They left before sunset, saying they had dinner plans. I waved from the porch as their car disappeared down the road, headlights flashing like fading promises. When the silence returned, I sat at the table, staring at their empty cups. The stew had gone cold. I whispered to myself, maybe this is what being forgotten feels like. I don't know how long I sat there, but when the kettle hissed again, I felt the weight of decades pressing on my chest. Memories came in waves. The day their father left, the nights I worked at the diner, the mornings I walked them to school pretending I wasn't exhausted. They never knew how I'd swallowed my pride to make sure they never missed a field trip or a birthday gift. They only knew the surface, the tired woman who never smiled quite enough. Hey there, my dear family and friends. If you're already tuned in and ready to enjoy this story, hit that subscribe button, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because tomorrow I'll be bringing you another story just as captivating, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Now back to the story. That night I took out an old photo album. The pictures were yellowed, the edges curled. There we were, me, their father, 2 bright little children who believed love was forever. I traced their faces with my finger, whispering, "You'll understand one day." Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote in my journal. They said I'm not half the woman she is. Maybe that's true. Maybe I'm twice the woman they'll never know. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like an impatient ghost. I closed the curtains and sat by the fire, letting the warmth touch my face. That's when the tears came. Not loud or messy, just soft, steady rivers down my cheeks. Because no matter how strong you become, being compared to another woman, especially by your own children, cuts deep in places no one can see. And yet, somewhere inside that ache, a quiet voice whispered, "This isn't the end. They don't know everything yet. The next morning I went to church as I often do. The pews were mostly empty, just the old and the weary like me. I lit a candle, not for myself but for my children. Lord, I whispered, let truth find its way home. On my way out, I met Mrs. Langley, my neighbor. She looked at me with her usual mix of curiosity and pity. You all right, dear? She asked. I smiled faintly. Children said some things. Hurtful things. But they'll learn. She nodded knowingly. Truth always has its own timing. I went home, made another pot of tea, and sat by the window again. The leaves were starting to turn gold. Autumn had arrived, painting everything beautiful and dying all at once. I thought about life, how it does that, how it can decay and bloom in the same breath. Have you ever been judged by someone who only knew half your story? Tell me in the comments. What did you wish they understood about you? The morning after my children's visit, the house felt emptier than usual. The walls seemed to hold their laughter from years ago, echoes of small feet racing down the hallway, the smell of pancakes, the chaos of family. I touched the doorway where I used to mark their heights. The pencil lines were still there, faint but faithful. I made tea again, though it didn't taste like anything. My hands trembled as I poured it, the steam fogging my glasses. Their words still rang in my head. You're not half the woman Dad's wife is. It wasn't just the insult, it was the certainty in their voices, the conviction that they were right. When someone you love misunderstands you so completely, it's like looking into a mirror and seeing a stranger. Later that afternoon, I pulled out an old tin box from the cupboard. Inside were folded letters, some from their father, some from me, and some I never sent. I untied the faded blue ribbon and opened the first one. His handwriting slanted forward, bold and certain. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The kids will be fine. You always overthink. I remembered that day vividly, the day he left. I stood on the porch as he packed his bags, the children crying behind me. He didn't look back. He just said, "It's better this way." And somehow I believed him. I spent years trying to be both mother and father. I learned how to fix leaky pipes, balance the bills, and patch the holes in their shoes. There were nights I went hungry so they could eat, mornings I stitched their clothes before work, smiling as if love could hide exhaustion. But to them, all they saw was a woman who was tired. When they visited their father on weekends, he had a bigger house, a prettier wife, softer music playing. They thought that was happiness. They never saw the price I paid for theirs. That evening, I sat at my desk and began to write a letter. Not to send, but to remember. My dear ones, you see the glow of his new life and think it's light. But sometimes light blinds. You think I was cold, but you didn't see the days I cried in the laundry room so you wouldn't have to. I never told you why I stayed silent all those years. It wasn't weakness. It was love, the kind that bleeds quietly. I set the pen down and stared out the window. The sky was burning orange, the kind of sunset that makes you feel like the world's still got a few beautiful things left. That night I dreamt of the diner. I used to work the late shift there when the kids were small. I'd scrub tables, pour coffee, smile at truckers passing through. The jukebox played sad country songs about love gone wrong, and I used to hum along while wiping glasses. Sometimes I'd glance at the door and imagine him walking in, my husband saying he made a mistake. But the door never opened for me. Once, during a break, I wrote his name on a napkin and whispered, "You still have my heart, even if you don't want it." That was 20 years ago. I never said it out loud again. The next morning I went into town for groceries. People nodded politely but didn't linger. Divorce leaves a stain in small places. People remember. At the bakery I overheard two women talking. "She's such a sweet lady, that new Mrs. Harlow," one said. "Always so put together. You'd never guess she stepped into a broken family." They both sighed in admiration. I walked away quietly, clutching my bread, my throat tight. When I got home I placed the loaf on the counter and just stood there for a while. I wasn't angry, anger burns fast. What I felt was slower, heavier. It was the grief of being erased from your own story. That evening, I received a text from my daughter. Dad's wife is hosting a small dinner next week. She wants you to come. Maybe it's time to make peace. Make peace. The phrase hung in the air like perfume. Pleasant, artificial. Still, I agreed. Not out of pride, but because sometimes showing up is the only way to reclaim your dignity. I spent the next few days in silence, baking, tidying, thinking. I replayed every moment from our past, wondering when I had stopped being enough. The truth was, I'd never stopped. They had just stopped seeing me. When the day came, I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing my faded blue dress. My reflection looked older, but my eyes still carried a spark. Let them see who I really am, I whispered to my own reflection. At the dinner, their father's new wife greeted me with a smile so polished it reflected the chandelier. It's wonderful to finally meet you, she said, voice dripping with practiced grace. Likewise, I replied. My voice was steady, my hands not so much. The kids looked uncomfortable. My son couldn't meet my eyes again. My daughter fussed with her napkin. The dinner began. Laughter filled the table, polite and shallow. But every time someone mentioned how wonderful she was, a quiet ache tightened in my chest. Barely ate. Instead I watched how she held his hand, how he leaned in close, how my children looked at her with admiration. And I realized something painful but freeing. They didn't know the truth, and maybe, for now, they weren't ready. But truth doesn't stay buried forever. That night as I left, my daughter hugged me again, softly this time. Mom, she whispered. You okay? Smiled. Of course, dear. You go on now. You have your life. When I reached home, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. The night was silent except for the chirping of crickets and the creak of the old floorboards. I looked up at the stars and whispered, they'll see. One day they'll see. Have you ever stayed silent just to protect someone you loved? If you had the chance to speak your truth today, what would you say? It's strange how silence can stretch across miles. You think a conversation ends when you hang up the phone, but sometimes it lingers in your chest for days. Unfinished, unresolved. A week had passed since that dinner, and I hadn't heard from my children. Not a text, not a call. I wasn't surprised. The world teaches people to move on quickly, but a mother never does. Every evening, I'd sit by the window with my tea and watch the sunset crawl down behind the hills. The light turned everything gold for a few minutes, as if heaven tried to make even sorrow look holy. I told myself they were busy, work, life, families. But deep down, I knew they were trying to make sense of me. Maybe they were wondering why I'd come to that dinner, why I'd smiled through every polite jab, every comparison. They didn't know that silence was the only armor I had left. At the same time, I imagined their world was spinning too. My daughter. Oh, she'd always been the thinker, the one who asked why too much as a child. I could picture her now, replaying my face that night, wondering why I didn't argue back. Maybe she told herself it was guilt. Maybe she told herself I didn't care. My son, though, he was quieter, more like me. When he was small, he'd climb into my bed during thunderstorms and whisper, I'm not scared, Mom, I just want to make sure you're okay. Now he barely looked me in the eyes. I knew that kind of avoidance. It's the kind that comes from guilt. But guilt can be stubborn. It makes people rewrite memories to survive them. 3 days later, Mrs. Langley stopped by with a basket of apples from her tree. You've been awfully quiet, dear, she said, setting them down on my counter. I smiled faintly. Just thinking. She nodded, the way old women do when they've learned that thinking usually means hurting. Children can be cruel, she said softly, but it's only because they don't know what love costs until it's their turn to pay it. I laughed a little, though my chest ached. I just wish I knew what they remember of me. She took my hand. What they remember will change. Time has a way of rearranging the truth until it starts to look honest again. After she left, I sat in the garden for a long time. The late autumn wind had started to carry a chill. The roses were fading, petals falling like tired dreams. I ran my fingers through the dirt. It felt grounding, like touching something that still belonged to me. Meanwhile, across town, my daughter sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through old photos on her phone. I know this because she told me later. How she found one from when she was 6, me holding her after her first ballet recital. My smile was tired but proud, my dress a little worn. Behind the photo was a note written on the back. For my sunshine, who makes everything worth it. She said she cried that night, though she didn't know why. Maybe it was the kind of crying that comes when the heart begins to remember what it tried to forget. But guilt is slippery. The next morning, she told her brother she thought I was just pretending to be hurt, trying to make them feel guilty. She's always been dramatic, she said. Dad said so. And that's how resistance sounds. It doesn't come with anger, but with justification. It's the mind's way of staying safe from the truth. That same week I got a call from the hospital. Mrs. Harlow. We'd like to confirm your contact information for Mr. Harlow's emergency records. You're still listed as next of kin. My breath caught. After all these years, he'd never updated it. I confirmed the details, my voice steady but my hands trembling. When I hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the receiver. My ex-husband, still tethered to me on paper, though detached in every other way. Life has such odd ironies. That night I prayed for him, not because he deserved it, but because peace is lighter to carry than bitterness. A few days later I saw my daughter again. She stopped by briefly, dropping off some of the apples I'd given her years ago, now made into pie. Thought you might like some, she said, avoiding eye contact. Thank you, dear, I said softly. You didn't have to. We stood in awkward silence for a moment, the kind that buzzes with everything unsaid. Then, trying to fill the space, she blurted out, Dad's wife said you used to be jealous of her. I smiled gently. Maybe she was jealous of what I had before she did. She blinked, uncertain how to respond. I didn't elaborate. I just wiped my hands on a towel and asked about her work, her children, her life. After she left, I sat with my slice of pie and whispered, sweet but heavy. And I wasn't talking about the dessert. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a text from my son. Hey Mom. Sorry about last time. Didn't mean to be harsh. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed, I know, sweetheart. Love doesn't hold grudges. He didn't reply, but I saw the read receipt. And that was enough. That week something began to shift. Small things. Subtle. My daughter posted an old photo of me online for Throwback Thursday. My son called to ask about a recipe. Tiny cracks in the wall between us. Still, they weren't ready for the truth. Not yet. And neither perhaps was I. Because speaking truth means reopening wounds you've learned to live with. And I wasn't sure I was ready to bleed again. So I kept tending my garden, baking pies, and talking to God in the evenings. Waiting. Not for an apology but for understanding. Sometimes, healing starts not with words but with patience. And though I didn't know it then, the storm that would change everything was already forming on the horizon. When someone hurts you deeply, do you confront them, or wait for time to speak for you? Tell me in the comments how you believe healing begins. And her children to face their shared past. And the truth begins to surface. It was a Tuesday morning when the phone rang. Early, too early for good news. Mrs. Harlow. A voice said, gentle but firm. Your ex-husband has been admitted to St. Joseph's Hospital. His condition is stable, but critical care is required. We couldn't reach his wife, and you're still listed as his emergency contact. For a moment the room tilted. I pressed the receiver tighter to my ear. Yes, I understand. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the chipped paint on the kitchen wall. It was the same wall where he'd once leaned, laughing before he left us. Life has a strange way of circling back, always when you least expect it. I thought about ignoring the call, about letting someone else deal with it. But after all the years, all the pain, a small voice inside whispered, go. So I packed my bag. Just a sweater, my rosary, and an old photograph of the kids. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and sorrow. I found him in room 214, pale, thinner than I remembered, tubes running from his arm. His hair was grayer, his skin fragile. I stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside. He opened his eyes slowly. "You came," he croaked. "I did," I said softly, setting my bag down. "You're still using my number. Figured you'd need someone who remembers your stubborn heart." He tried to smile, but it hurt him. "Guess I never got around to changing it." "I noticed," I murmured, pulling the chair closer. We didn't say much after that. Just sat in silence, the kind that comes after a lifetime of words that should have been said but weren't. Later that afternoon, the door opened again. My daughter and son walked in, their eyes widening when they saw me sitting beside him. "Mom, what are you?" "The hospital called me first," I said gently, not rising. "They couldn't reach her." They exchanged a glance. "Dad's wife is at a conference," my daughter said, guilt flickering in her tone. "She's flying back tomorrow." I nodded, then turned to their father. "You're in good hands," I said. "But until she's here, I'll stay." No one argued. They didn't dare. That evening I helped the nurse adjust his four. My daughter sat quietly in the corner, scrolling through her phone, but I saw the way she watched me, like she was seeing something she hadn't before. My son brought coffee and handed me one without a word. "Thank you," I said. He nodded, eyes avoiding mine. Later, when their father drifted to sleep, I took out the photograph from my bag. It was old, faded, him, me, and the two of them as toddlers. Their father smiled brightly in the picture, but my eyes told another story. My daughter leaned closer. "You kept that?" "Of course," I whispered. "It was never about forgetting. It was about surviving." She didn't reply, but I noticed her swallow hard, the way people do when they're fighting tears. The next day his new wife arrived, perfect as always. Her perfume filled the hallway before she even entered the room. "Oh, you must be," she began, then stopped when she saw me sitting by his bed. "The first one," I said with a small, tired smile. Her lips tightened. "I see. I'm glad you came," I added. "He needs you." She turned her attention to him, cooing softly, arranging the blankets, her tone dripping with affection. It was a performance, smooth and practiced. The children watched in silence, uneasy. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in their eyes. That evening, while the nurse updated the chart, I overheard the new wife on the phone in the hallway. Her voice was sharp, impatient. "I can't stay here all week." "He'll be fine, he always is." Yes, I'll check in tomorrow." She turned and saw me standing there. Her smile froze. "Oh, I didn't see you." "I've been invisible for a long time," I said softly. She looked away. "You're a better woman than I am, coming here after everything." I met her gaze. "No, just an older one who learned that forgiveness isn't weakness." She didn't answer. She just walked away. Inside the room, my children looked at me differently now. Curious, hesitant, unsure. My son asked quietly, "Mom, why did you come?" "After everything he did." I adjusted the blanket over their father's arm and said, "Because love doesn't end when marriage does. It just changes its shape." He looked down, his throat tightening. "I don't think I could do that." "You will when it's your turn to forgive," I said. He didn't reply, but he didn't look away either. That night, as the hospital lights dimmed, I dozed off in the chair. I dreamt of the past again, of the night he left. I could still hear the door slam, the sound of little feet running after him, the echo of my daughter's voice shouting, "Daddy, don't go." I'd never told them what happened after that. The nights I cried into his old shirts, the days I walked to work because the car had broken down and I couldn't afford repairs. But sitting here now, next to his hospital bed, I realized, maybe it was finally time they knew. The next morning, I woke to find my daughter watching me. "You didn't go home?" she asked softly. "Didn't see the point," I said, stretching my back. "Your father always needed someone to keep him alive." She smiled faintly through tired eyes. "You really did love him, didn't you?" I looked at her for a long time, then nodded. "Yes. Enough to let him go when loving him started to hurt more than losing him." Her eyes glistened. I don't think I ever understood that." You will, I said, reaching for her hand. When love teaches you its sharpest lesson. She squeezed my hand. It was the first time she'd touched me in months. By the time the sun rose, the nurse came in to check his vitals. He's doing better, she said cheerfully. Looks like he'll recover. I smiled faintly. Good. He's got people who love him. But inside I knew something had changed. Not in him but in us. My children had seen me not as the bitter ex-wife their father described, but as the woman who still showed up when no one else did. Sometimes grace doesn't shout. It whispers. And that whisper can undo years of misunderstanding. As I left the hospital that day, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. Tired, yes, but lighter. The road ahead would still be long, but something inside me stirred, like a window opening after a storm. And I thought maybe truth doesn't have to be told. Sometimes it just has to be witnessed. If someone hurt you deeply but needed your help one day, would you go? Or would you let the past decide for you? The hospital air had changed. It was calmer now, lighter. Their father's color was returning, and the nurses smiled more often. But beneath the relief, something quieter was unfolding between my children and me. They watched me differently. Not the way you look at someone out of obligation, but out of curiosity, like they were seeing a new face inside an old photograph. That morning, while their father slept, I slipped out to the cafeteria for coffee. When I came back, my daughter was standing by the window, a folder in her hands. "Mom," she said, voice trembling, "these were in Dad's old file. The nurse asked me to organize the insurance papers and I found these." Froze. I knew exactly what these were before she even opened the folder. Inside were letters, dozens of them. My handwriting, my words, the ones I wrote years ago after he left, begging him to stay connected to his children, to visit them, to remember them. Her voice broke as she read aloud one of them. "I won't tell the kids why you left. They don't need to carry our pain. I'll tell them you're working hard, that you still love them. Just please write to them once in a while. Even a short note will keep their hearts safe." Her tears dripped onto the paper. You never told us." I sank into the chair. Because love shouldn't make a child choose sides. My son picked up another letter. Shorter, written years later. "They miss you, but they're angry now. I can't fix what they don't understand. But I'll keep the door open in case you ever walk back through it." He swallowed hard. "He never showed us any of this." He nodded. "I know." The silence that followed was different this time. Not cold, heavy with realization. They were beginning to piece together the truth. I hadn't been the bitter woman their father described. I'd been the one holding the family together in the shadows. Later that evening, while their father dozed, I walked down the hall to get some air. I heard their voices faintly behind me. "She wrote him for years," my daughter whispered. "And he never told us," my son replied. "He made it sound like she just gave up." "She didn't," she said softly. "She was fighting for us." I stopped, my hand resting against the cold wall, tears warming my cheeks. I didn't turn back. Sometimes the best way to be heard is to keep walking. That night, they asked if I wanted to have dinner together in the hospital cafeteria. We sat around a small table, the three of us, trays of soup steaming between us. For the first time in years they asked questions. Not polite ones but real ones. "Mom," my son began quietly, "why didn't you tell us? We thought you didn't care anymore." I stirred my soup slowly. "Because I didn't want you to grow up carrying someone else's sins. You deserved peace." "But we blamed you," my daughter said, her voice cracking. "We were so cruel." I smiled sadly. "Children believe what makes them feel safest. It's not your fault. Your father gave you a story that hurt less than the truth." She reached across the table, grabbing my hand. "I wish I'd known." "Now you do," I said gently. "And that's enough." After dinner, my daughter went back to the room to organize paperwork, while I sat in the chapel downstairs. The light from the candles painted the walls gold, and the air smelled faintly of wax and lilies. I whispered into the quiet, Lord, they're finally seeing. Please let this be healing, not more pain. When I opened my eyes, I saw my son standing in the doorway, watching me. He didn't say anything, just came and knelt beside me. His hand found mine. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered. I turned to him, brushing his hair back like I did when he was small. You don't need to be sorry for growing up with half the story. He shook his head. No. I'm sorry for not asking for the other half sooner. That's when I broke. Quietly but fully. Decades of silence melted into tears that shook through both of us. Later that night, when we returned to the hospital room, their father was awake. He looked between us, confusion flickering in his eyes. What's going on? He asked weakly. My daughter met his gaze with new strength. We found Mom's letters. His expression changed. Guilt, shock, maybe even fear. Those were private, he said quickly. No, I said softly, stepping forward. They were ours. They always were. He looked away, his jaw tightening. You could have told them your side. I could have, I replied. But I wanted them to love you, not resent you. He swallowed hard. And now they know both sides. That's all I ever wanted. He closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. Maybe regret, maybe exhaustion. It didn't matter anymore. My children sat beside me that night until the nurses turned off the lights. No one spoke. We didn't need to. The truth had filled every corner of the room. When dawn came, I walked out to the hospital garden. The morning was cool, the air damp with dew. My daughter followed me out, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Mom, she said softly, can I ask you something? Of course. If you could go back, would you still love him? I thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. Yes, but I'd love myself more. She nodded, tears glimmering. I think I understand that now. And just like that, the years of resentment began to fade. Not erased but replaced. Replaced by understanding, by compassion, by the beginning of something new. They had read the letters. They had seen the truth. And they could never unsee it. Have you ever discovered the truth about someone too late? And wished you could apologize sooner? What would you say if you had one more chance? It had been a week since his discharge. The air in my house felt different. Lighter, though still touched with uncertainty. My children were visiting every day now, always bringing something small. A pie, a bouquet, laughter. It was strange, having them linger again, filling spaces that had long grown used to silence. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch mending an old quilt, my daughter joined me. She had that same thoughtful look she used to wear as a child when trying to solve a puzzle too big for her hands. You know, she said softly, I used to think this porch smelled like sadness. I smiled, not looking up. And now? She breathed in the warm autumn air. Now it smells like home. The words caught me by surprise. My needle paused mid-stitch. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time I saw not the teenager who judged me, but the woman she had become. So much of me in her, even in her defiance. Thank you, I whispered. She smiled. You don't have to thank me. I'm the one who needs to. That evening my son came by with groceries. He'd always been quieter than his sister, but that day, he spoke with a softness that disarmed me. I've been thinking, he said, setting the bags down. When Dad left, I was angry at you for not fighting harder. But now I see you were fighting the whole time. Just not in the way I understood. I turned toward him. You were a boy. You weren't supposed to understand yet. He sat at the kitchen table, watching me unpack the groceries. I do now. You carried all of us on your back, and we never even noticed. Chuckled gently. Mothers aren't meant to be noticed. We're just meant to make sure no one falls. He shook his head. That's not true anymore. I see you, Mom. Something broke inside me then. Not a painful break, but a release, like the first crack in winter ice letting the water move again. Later that night, the three of us cooked together. We hadn't done that since they were children. Since before everything fell apart. The kitchen filled with the smell of onions and rosemary. the sound of laughter echoing against walls that hadn't heard it in years. "Remember when you burned the stew that one Thanksgiving?" my son teased. I laughed, shaking my head. "Oh, I remember you two trying to eat it anyway just to make me feel better." My daughter snorted. "It tasted like smoke and salt." "And love," I said. We laughed until our sides hurt. And for that one golden hour, it didn't feel like a family once broken. It felt like one still growing, still learning, still capable of joy. After dinner, we sat in the living room, the glow of the fireplace flickering across their faces. My daughter leaned her head on my shoulder. "Mom," she murmured, "I used to wish you were more like her." "I know," I said quietly. "But now, I see that she always wanted to look perfect. You wanted to keep us whole. There's a difference." I brushed her hair gently. "Perfection is easy to fake, sweetheart. Wholeness is something you fight for." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "You've been fighting for us your whole life." "And I always will," I said. "Even when I'm gone." We fell into silence, watching the fire crackle. My son leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I told Dad about the letters," he said. He cried. I closed my eyes for a moment. Good. Maybe it's his turn to see the truth too. "He said he didn't deserve you," my daughter added softly. I smiled sadly. Maybe not. But deserving someone isn't the same as needing them. Sometimes love is just showing up when it hurts. A little later, my daughter brought out an old box from the attic. "I found this while helping you sort things last week," she said. "You kept all our baby things." I opened the box slowly. Inside were tiny shoes, drawings, and a worn baby blanket stitched with both their names. I traced the faded threads with trembling fingers. "I kept everything," I said, "because I wanted to remember the days before life got complicated." My son chuckled. "You even kept my old report cards." "Well," I said, smiling, "they remind me you were human." He laughed. "Barely." We all laughed again, and in that laughter lived something sacred, something earned through pain and time and truth. Later, after they'd left, I stood on the porch again, the stars bright above me. I wrapped the old quilt around my shoulders. My house no longer felt empty. It hummed with memory and new beginnings. Inside, the phone rang. It was their father. His voice was weak but steady. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For taking care of me. And for showing them who you really are." I was quiet for a moment. "I didn't show them anything," I said. "They just finally looked." He sighed. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," I replied softly. "But forgiveness was never about you. It was about setting myself free." He didn't speak again, but I could hear him crying quietly on the other end. I hung up gently, whispering into the night. We're all learning after all. As I turned off the porch light, I realized something simple but profound. The home that had once echoed with loneliness was now filled again, with laughter, with warmth, and with forgiveness. Sometimes love doesn't arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it returns quietly, carrying the sound of your children's laughter through an open door. Have you ever rebuilt something you thought was broken forever? What was the first small sign that told you healing had begun? It had been nearly 2 months since the hospital. Life had started finding its rhythm again. The kids visited often, laughter was returning to our home, and for once, silence didn't ache, it rested. But peace is fragile. It doesn't shout when it's leaving. It slips quietly through cracks you didn't even know were there. It happened one evening, just as the sun was folding behind the horizon. My daughter had come over with a box of old photos she'd been sorting from their father's house. "Thought we could look through these together," she said cheerfully. We sat on the living room floor, sifting through years we hadn't spoken about. Then her expression shifted. She froze mid-turn, holding up a photograph, one I had never seen. It was their father, smiling broadly, his arm around the woman who had replaced me. They looked young, happy. And the date in the corner was printed 6 months before our divorce was finalized. My daughter's voice cracked. "You said he left after." "You said." Closed my eyes. I said I didn't want you to hate him. Her face crumpled. So he was with her before you were gone? Yes, I whispered. And you covered for him. I did what I thought would protect you. She stood abruptly, the sound of the photo hitting the table like glass. Protect us from what? From knowing the truth. From knowing we grew up loving a lie. My son entered from the kitchen, holding a cup of tea. What's going on? She knew, my daughter snapped, tears spilling now. She knew he cheated. And she let us believe she was the reason he left. My son looked at me, stunned. Mom, is that true? I swallowed hard. Yes. The silence that followed was unbearable. Thick, electric, filled with betrayal on both sides. My daughter shook her head, stepping back. All those years I thought he left because you pushed him away. Blamed you. And you just let me. I wanted you to have one good parent in your heart, I said softly. I didn't want to take that away. She pressed her hands to her face. Do you even realize how twisted that sounds? Her words hit deep because they weren't cruel, they were raw. My son turned away, his voice tight. I think I need some air. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the half-drunk tea on the counter. The house, once warm again, felt cold. I could still hear their voices upstairs, low, angry, confused. I thought I'd done the right thing. But maybe, in trying to protect them, I denied them the truth they deserved. The phone rang. It was their father. They know, don't they? His tone was heavy. They found the photo. He sighed. I'm sorry. Don't be, I said bitterly. We both created this. You with your choices, me with my silence. He didn't answer. Just breathed heavily. I never wanted them to hate you. They didn't, I whispered. Until now. The next morning my daughter didn't come by. My son texted once. We need space. Those 3 words burned deeper than any wound I'd ever carried. I wandered the house, touching the small things they'd brought back into it. My son's jacket on the chair, my daughter's mug by the sink, the quilt we'd mended together. Everything smelled of them. Everything hurt. That night, I sat in their old room, looking at the faded drawings still taped to the wall. A stick figure family. Mom, Dad, the 2 of them, all holding hands beneath a smiling sun. Children draw the world as they hope it will stay. Parents, meanwhile, live with the guilt of knowing it never can. Days passed. Then a week. The silence grew louder. One evening I found an envelope on the porch. Inside was a letter. My daughter's handwriting. Mom, I need to understand something. Were you trying to protect us? Or were you protecting yourself? Because I can forgive pain, but I can't forgive lies. Not again. I sat there long after the sun went down, reading that line over and over. My hands trembled. For the first time I wasn't sure what to say. Because maybe the truth was both. Maybe I had been protecting them. And maybe I'd been protecting the part of me that didn't want to be hated anymore. The following morning I walked to the old bridge just outside town. The same one I used to cross every day on my way to work when the kids were little. The river beneath still murmured the same quiet rhythm, like time itself hadn't moved. I whispered into the wind. Did I do right by them? But the water never answers. It only carries what you drop into it. I took the photograph they'd found, the one that had started this new storm, and let it slip from my hand. It fluttered once, twice, before the current claimed it. Sometimes letting go isn't noble. Sometimes it's just survival. That night, I returned home to find a single message on my phone from my son. Dad told us everything. We didn't know it all. Give us time, Mom. It wasn't forgiveness yet. But it wasn't silence either. The house was still. I poured myself a cup of tea, sitting by the window as the moonlight poured in. I could feel the ache of loss again, deep and familiar. But there was also something else beneath it. Small ember of faith. I had lost my family before and somehow found them again. Maybe this break, like the last one, wasn't the end. It was the final test of whether love could survive even the truth. A week passed. Then another. The house grew still again like it had all those years before. Not angry, not broken, just waiting. I woke each morning to the same sound. The kettle whistling, the old clock ticking, the soft creak of the porch swing in the wind. But without my children's laughter echoing through it, the house felt like a photograph, beautiful but frozen in time. They hadn't come by since the photo. No calls, no messages, only silence. And I couldn't tell if this time they were punishing me, or simply trying to understand me. I busied myself with the little things. Folding laundry, watering plants, pretending not to glance at the phone every 5 minutes. But at night, when the quiet pressed too heavy against my chest, I found myself whispering into the dark. Did I lose them for good this time? One morning I went to the farmer's market. It was something I hadn't done in months. The air was sharp with autumn. The stalls glowed with oranges and golds, pumpkins, honey jars, freshly baked bread. At one table, a vendor handed me a jar of apple jam. "On the house," she said. "You look like someone who could use a little sweetness." I smiled faintly, thanked her, and walked home slowly, clutching the jar like it was something precious. That afternoon, as I set it on the counter, I noticed the old family photo still stuck to the refrigerator. The 4 of us, long before the storm. I traced my finger over my daughter's face, then my son's. That's when I knew. I couldn't lose them again. Not because of pride. Not because of fear. I had spent too much of my life being quiet, thinking silence was love. It was time to speak, not to defend myself but to reach for them. That evening I sat down with a blank piece of paper. My hands trembled as I began to write. My dear children, I have spent so much of my life trying to shield you from pain that I ended up giving you confusion instead. I thought silence was protection, but I see now that truth, even when it hurts, is the only thing that heals. Your father and I made mistakes, big ones. But love, even the broken kind, is never wasted. Shaped you. Shaped me. And it taught me that courage isn't staying silent to keep the peace. Speaking even when your voice shakes. If you can forgive me, I'll be here. If you can't yet, I'll still be here. Always. When I sealed the envelopes, one for each of them, my hands felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting to be understood. I was choosing to love without condition. The next morning, I walked into town to mail the letters. The post office was quiet, sunlight slanting through the window like gold dust. I hesitated a moment before dropping them into the slot. The envelopes slid through with a soft thunk. It was done. Whether they answered or not, I had finally said everything I'd been holding back. As I walked home, I felt tears sting my eyes. Not from sadness this time, but from release. 3 days passed. No reply. On the 4th, I found 2 envelopes on my porch, both in handwriting I'd know anywhere. My heart pounded. I sat on the steps, sunlight warm against my back, and opened the first one. It was from my son. I've been angry, but mostly at myself, for not seeing what was right in front of me. You did what you thought was right. Get that now. Forgive you. Love you. Your son. The tears came fast. I opened the second envelope, my daughter's. You were right. I didn't need to hate Dad to love you. I just needed to see you, really see you. Thank you for still being here, even when I wasn't. Love you. Always. Your daughter. I pressed both letters to my chest, sobbing into the quiet. The ache that had lived inside me for decades, the ache of being unseen, unheard, began to dissolve. That evening I cooked dinner for 3. I didn't know if they'd come, but I set the table anyway. And right as the sun dipped below the trees, I heard a car door close outside. 2 sets of footsteps. When I opened the door, there they were. My children standing side by side, both holding the letters I'd sent them. "Can we come in?" my daughter asked softly. I nodded, tears already filling my eyes. "You never have to ask." They stepped inside. My son wrapped his arms around me first, tight and trembling. My daughter followed, burying her face into my shoulder. For a long time we just stood there. 3 people finally finding the courage to be honest and the grace to forgive. After dinner, my daughter said quietly, "You were right, Mom. Truth really does set you free." Smiled. It doesn't set you free all at once, but it starts the unlocking. Later that night after they left, I sat by the window watching the stars. I could still feel their warmth in the room, their laughter, their forgiveness, their presence. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. Felt like a home again. Spring arrived slowly that year. The air felt gentler, like even the wind had forgiven winter. It had been months since the letters. Months since that night my children came back home. We had learned how to live together again. Not as a family pretending everything was fine, but as one that had finally stopped pretending at all. The scars were still there, of course, but they no longer hurt to touch. Every Sunday my children came for dinner. Sometimes their father joined us too, now frail but quieter, humbler. The first time he came, the silence between us was thick, years of unsaid words balanced on the edge of every breath. But I had made peace with the past. I could look at him now without the ache of bitterness. That evening after dinner, as my daughter cleared the plates, he looked across the table and said quietly, "You were always the better person, you know." I shook my head. "No, just the one who stayed to clean up the mess." He smiled faintly. "Thank you for never turning them against me." I met his eyes. They didn't need to hate you to learn. They just needed to see you for who you were. He nodded, his eyes glistening. "And you for who you are." My son came back into the room then, carrying coffee. "You two okay?" he asked, half smiling. I looked at him and his sister, both grown, both whole again, and said softly, "We're better than we've been in years." Later that night, when everyone had gone, I walked outside with my daughter to see them off. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "You're not just half the woman Dad's wife was." I blinked, startled, until she smiled through tears and added, "You were twice the woman we ever realized." I laughed, the sound breaking through the night air like a bell. "Oh, sweetheart, don't say that. Life isn't a competition." "I know," she said, "but truth deserves its moment." She got into the car, waving as they drove away. I stood there long after the taillights disappeared, the words echoing softly in my chest. When I went back inside, the house glowed with warmth. On the counter sat a note, written in my son's handwriting. "Mom, we were wrong. You were never less, never bitter, never small. You were just human and strong enough to love us anyway." I folded the note carefully and tucked it into the same box where I'd once kept all the letters I wrote their father. Only this time the box didn't feel heavy. It felt finished. That night I sat by the fire, wrapped in the old quilt we had mended together. The flames danced softly, their light brushing against the framed photos on the mantel, snapshots of life reclaimed. There was one new picture there now. Me, my son, my daughter, and even their father sitting together on the porch. Not perfect, not polished, but real. It made me think of something I'd once told my daughter, that love changes its shape. It doesn't always stay the way you first imagine it. Sometimes it comes back quieter, wiser, and infinitely stronger. And that's what we had now. Love reshaped by truth. As I sipped my tea, I whispered into the quiet, "You're not half the woman Dad's wife is," repeating the words that had once broken me. But this time I smiled. Because I knew now, they weren't true then, and they never would be again. The next morning I found myself back at the farmer's market. The same vendor smiled as I approached. "Back for more sweetness," she teased, handing me another jar of apple jam. I laughed. "Always. But this time I'm bringing company." And sure enough, there they were. My children walking toward me, their faces bright, their laughter carrying across the spring air. My daughter slipped her arm through mine, my son taking the bags from my hands. "We were thinking," he said, "maybe Sunday dinners should be at our place next week." I smiled, heart full. "I'd like that." We walked together through the market, shoulder to shoulder, sunlight catching the edges of everything. New fruit, new flowers, new beginnings. Sometimes redemption doesn't come with grand gestures or miracles. Sometimes it looks like a family walking together again, the pain behind them and the truth between them, shining like morning light. Before we left, I turned back once more, looking at the road that had led us here. Long, painful, necessary. I whispered to myself, This is what love looks like after the storm. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like half of anything. Felt whole.
Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this video, and I'm confident you enjoyed it. We've got plenty more exciting and heartwarming stories waiting for you. Just click on the image on your screen to watch the next one.